Alright, so let's jump into how the PSD is constructed. And the way I start, I have my RGB with the fog rendered out, just like how we took a look at in the render layers. And this is how it comes in. Now I've alphaed it out, taken it out, so I have my layer separated here. And this is all the other stuff that goes on top, but we're right here at the RGB level. Set that so we can see it. So first thing I do when I bring this in is I want to start setting up my sky and getting an exposure started and working. So I'm looking for an early morning kind of lighting scenario, and this has something similar to what I'm after. Now this may be a sunset, but it could still work for it. Now the values are a little high, and I've stitched a couple photos together that I've shot myself. So, and that's the good thing about shooting your own photos, is that I have it super high res, as you can see, which is good. So I'm just going to copy that over and paste it underneath the RGB. And of course you can see this thing is huge, and we want the light to come from screen left, so I'm just going to flip this, and you can see I'm getting some different things going on, but what I'm after is I want compositionally the clouds in the sky to go into perspective, so create some depth in the shot itself. So I like these lines going back. I want some of that color, but I also want a little bit of that dark cloud to be over top, so it kind of suggests that it's early morning, and it creates some nice kind of contrast there, dark against light and then light against dark. This is starting to work, and you can play around with this until you've got something that you like, darker clouds coming down or lighter, and I think I like it there. A little higher, no. I'll get rid of that small cloud that I was looking at over here. Alright, I won't spend too much time on this because we have plenty more to do. And the other thing I'll always do is have a hue and saturation at the top of my layer stack. And it's essentially a color correct with the saturation taken out and then put on color mode. And the reason I put it on color mode is because if you put it on normal, it affects your it affects the values. We don't want to affect the values. We just want to take a look at what this thing will look like in grayscale. So we put it on color mode, and it won't affect the values. It will just affect the color. Alright, so that's always there. Now this gives me gives my brain a chance to digest only value and not color at all. So I can start playing around with the exposure the way I want. Now I have a a reference sheet on my other monitor that I'm always looking at. We took a look at it earlier on to guide us as far as exposure goes. And one thing that we noticed is that the sky was really bright. We don't get dark values in the sky. We want it to be bright because we're exposing for that shadow. All this detail in the shadow areas, the reason we see it is because we're exposing for it through our camera. So that means the lighter areas in our scene here are gonna shift a little higher, if not be blown out. Now I don't want to blow it out. I want to keep some detail in there, but if you take a look at just lifting it up slightly, could give you a different exposure. And I'm gonna shift it right around there is where I like it. Nice bright sky. We got that nice contrast between the dark and light. So once I've got my exposure set up and I like the way that it's going, and I'll do this a lot too, I'll flip my canvas just to get a fresh eye on the piece. Now this is a huge PSD. I've rendered everything at 4K and all my layers are in it. That's why it's taken a little bit longer than it should. In fact, let me just cancel it and forget that. Let me delete these layers that I don't need. So once I've got my exposure set up, now I've laid the foundation in, and value being the foundation of your painting, we can start playing around with color now. And this is where, this is the original, how it came in, and you can see that it's warm. It's got kind of a magenta blue color into the shadows, and that's just a little too warm for me. I want this to feel cool, like it's got that nice cool fill light coming in from the sky in the early morning sky, and this just has way too much warmth for me. So that being our RGB fog layer, bring this over, our RGB fog, I'm going to throw a color balance on this, and the way I do it is, because I don't want it to affect value, I usually put it on color mode, and that again won't affect my values that I've set up originally over there. You can see the difference. Now if you do like it and it kind of does give me a better look here, I may decide to keep it. But if I did want to darken it down, what I would do is put that on color mode and take a curve right underneath and put it on luminosity. And luminosity won't affect color, it'll only affect value. And if I wanted to, I can grade this down slightly. And then have my color on its color mode. That way I can always go back and readjust. If I want value adjustment or I want color adjustment, they're all separated and they don't affect each other. Me changing this curve in the values won't adjust the color because it's only affecting values. Let me get rid of that. We'll keep it the way it was. But that's generally how I go about doing it. Now at this stage, I've got the color, I've cooled it down, so we got rid of some of that magenta and we've pushed it into the cyans. If we take a look at the color balance, in the shadows I've shifted it towards the cyan and a little bit greener with just a hint of blue, just to get a little bit of cool color into the shadow areas. I want to play that warm light that we're going to bring in as a key against the cool shadows and create a nice little color harmony that way. Alright, so color is adjusted, my value is adjusted. Now everything I do up until this is going to match this value setup. I may decide later on, and you can see it at the top of my layer stack, a CC, a color correct, and that's going to hit everything below it. But before we get up to this level, everything I bring in is going to match and be tuned to the value structure I've set up here. So there's always room to make adjustments after the fact, but I usually keep it at the top of my layer stack so it affects everything underneath it, because everything underneath it has been kind of tuned, sorry about that, has been tuned to the images below. So once that's set up, I'm going to take a look at where I can make adjustments. So if we take a look at this, and let me grab a brush with some paint, and right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to evaluate where I can create separation, where I can create depth and add interest to the shot. So first thing I notice is that I really want the light to come in through here, kind of flow in this direction and illuminate this fog back here, and that's going to cause this to pop out. I want to create some separation there, so I'll mark it and we'll have separation between these two elements as well, because right now if I blur my vision, I turn this off, this is starting to kind of mush together. I know there's the black values are great because there's separation in the black values, there's separation in contrast, value contrast in the details from what's behind it, and that creates that separation and depth, but I want to push it a little bit more. So I'm going to highlight that, and I'm going in and I'm evaluating all the areas that that I can create this. And maybe here I can hit it with some light. Here I can create some separation. I know my light pass hasn't come in yet, so that light pass is going to create some separation for us too, but this is just evaluating it. So right here I want that tree separated. I want these trees separated. Maybe hit this with this light here. And I'm going in, I'm finding where I can play light against dark or dark against light and create separation to make the image read a little better. Now, we don't want to create too much contrast because that could be too confusing for our eye. So we want to keep it subtle, and we want to keep it organized. We don't want to just go all over the place creating contrasts that are going to distract us and just make our eyes bleed from too much information. So we want to do it strategically. So what's going to happen back here is going to be a lot more subtle than what's happening here. We want to keep our eye in this focal area right here, the main palace, and then we get to absorb all, kind of digest all this beautiful detail. So going back, I know, well, we can create some separation here into this tree from the background. We can create more separation here for sure from this guy and this guy, 1 and 2, to create more depth. So we have a 1, 2, and 3 read here, going back into space, creating some nice depth. And this is stuff that I could have hit up in CG, but sorry, in 3D, in our 3D scene. But for whatever reason, time constraints or just ease of not constantly rendering, I'm thinking about, okay, I can do that in Photoshop. I have the passes. I've rendered out mats for this guy over here, IDs like we saw. So it's going to be easy for me to add or subtract atmosphere back there. So keep those things in mind. It doesn't all have to be in 3D. We're setting it all up so that it makes our life easier in Photoshop as well, and those IDs that we rendered out are really going to help. Alright, let's take a look. Now there's going to be some lights. I may want some separation between this guy and that guy. And here as well. So maybe we have a light pass that will go and illuminate this surface. So we have a dark against light. And that's how I'm going to keep going and evaluating it. This guy's getting lost, so maybe I can play some lights in here. Add some lights here. Lights going up. And I know I've done this in the light pass, but this is just information for myself as well. Some light maybe going up there, some lights here, lights, 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 illuminating these forms. And once I've gotten this information, I'm going to save it, because this is like evaluating. This is like a first pass evaluation over what you're going to need to make this thing look successful. These are my kind of throwing out ideas straight onto the canvas. And we're going to start slowly doing that. You can see that haze layer right there happens to separate out, and this is, you get a good idea of what I mean when I highlight those things. Is take a look at the readability of that shape against the background. Before, it was starting to mush dark against, there is light, but it's starting to lose this beautiful tree back here. And if we put some haze right behind it, we poke it out a little bit. And that's using some of the elements that we created. So maybe using our ID passes for this that I'll bring in a second. So let's keep going here. Now I noticed that if I turn this on, there isn't much value change. Everything around this area is pretty much in the same value. There isn't a shift from a nice transition between my black levels from the foreground all the way to the background. We start getting some nice transition, and all of a sudden we get this big wash of pretty much atmosphere that's really affecting all of this and knocking all the black levels to pretty much in the same ballpark. And that's fine, but I want a little bit more depth and a little bit more contrast in the foreground where there's less fog, and it goes further back, and that's going to help us create depth as well. So first thing I do, and that's why we rendered out that RGB with no fog, because I now have a pass of the RGB with no fog at all. You can see there's the fog, no fog. And what I'm going to do is use my Z depth exactly the same way we did and grade it so that, and this is it at the top of the layer stack. What I usually do is I drag in my Z depth and I'll grade it separately so that every single time I have this pass at the top, and if I need to control another area, I'll bring it in again and grade for that area. And I'll show you that in a second. I don't have the passes open here, but I just want to show you guys how it's used. So once I grade that, I'm going to copy and paste, copy that, and paste it right into the channel here. If you just press Control V, it'll paste it into that channel, and you can turn it off, and now it's in this layer mask. And then what that's doing is it's telling the layer to show up in the white areas, of course, and then fade out as it gets further. So we want that contrast to be in the foreground where it's white, and then kind of slowly diminish as it goes further back in the distance. We don't want it to affect back here as much as it is affecting right here in the immediate foreground. So that's what we're using the Z depth for. Now again, I'll show you how to grade that Z depth as well. So once we have that set up, we can see, look at the difference between what that Z depth is doing. So it's not, I wouldn't be, if the other way I see people doing it is grabbing a soft brush, a big brush, and applying it over the entire painting like this, one big old brush. Well, that's doing the exact same thing the fog was, is hitting everything equally across that plane in depth. And that's why we use the Z depth, because we have subtle changes of depth. So you can see it's affecting this structure more than it's affecting its background. It's affecting the tree more than it's affecting that background. And we even see the hollow areas in the archways getting affected less. So, and obviously you can see that nice transition to the background of the boats. So that's what we want. We don't want an overall correction. We want a smooth, subtle transition across the plane in depth. All right, so once we hit that up, we also want the same color correct that we applied to our no fog also on top of our fog. So we just copy and pasted that over. And now we have the exact same color. So before it had that magenta look, and now we kind of cooled it down. And once I have that set up, again, I don't want it all across the board. I want it in strategic areas, which is the foreground and just right here. So we have a nice transition. And here, I'm going to paint with a soft brush. And it's okay to paint with a soft brush because our Z depth is controlling the depth. So that's where you can get away with using a soft brush. And that causes some nice flow. So we'll paint with our black and white. If it's too much, we can bring it back, or have that smooth transition. We just want to bring a little bit of contrast there and have our fog kind of heaviest near this area where the light is, and then kind of diminish so we pick up some nice details there. Alright, so that was our bringing back our contrast and getting our value. If we take a look at the difference, you can see it's kind of all in the same ballpark and kind of boring and kind of starting to look muddy. And we want to bring back some of that beautiful contrast. Bringing that back brings back some black levels, adds some serious depth to it, and some atmosphere. And from that step, I'm going to also look at some cleanup areas. So, of course, during our sloppy texturing, we have a lot of sloppy work going on. So what I like to do is just go around and start cleaning that stuff up. And it's either by sampling a value in there or really just picking it and painting it with a textured brush so that we get the same subtle differences. And we can get away with, because this is 4K and it'll be kind of sized down to 2K, so we can get away with that stuff. And we're just cleaning up kind of dirty areas, as you see, like, you know, whoops, slop kind of happening in these corners where we got sloppy and careless. Just cleaning that up. And just in this area is where I wanted to clean it up, but we'll get into cleaning up some of the stuff back there as well. Alright, so that's setting it up. We're going to start jumping into texturing, throwing in some light layers, more haze, and using Z-depth as well. Alright, before we go ahead, I want to show you guys that Z-depth real quick. And here are all my passes. Jump to Z-depth here. And just to grade your Z-depth, it's pretty much grab a curve, and depending on what area, there's a lot of information here, so don't be fooled by the white. And in our case, for that contrast paint back, we wanted the foreground and then the background to kind of disappear. So I'm just going to start sampling values here and grab the hand tool, start pulling this down. I'm going to press OK, and we can do this multiple times because there's a lot of information in here. Grab it again, pull it down, and I'm going to say I want it up in the foreground, but let's bring that down, get rid of that guy. We can start playing around with this kind of stuff. So you can see the slow gradual transition. And if I want to knock it down further, I say I don't want any of these values to be affected, so I'll just knock all that down. Almost to black if I need to. And then we'll bring up these values in the front here. And that will serve, and I'll copy and paste this over into my mask. So that's how you grade your Z-depth according to what you want it to be. I could do the reverse. And grade these up. And say I don't want it to affect the background. I want to affect only the background. Don't affect the foreground, only affect the background. So you can see the reverse effect happening there. Alright, let's jump back into our PSD. Oh, and just a quick, and you'll see this later on, but this is how you use the mask, the green layer, to paint behind those trees. But we'll jump into that in a little bit. Let's move on to key light. So our key light, if we take a look at our passes, this guy right here, and with reflection. So this is our key light pass. We just copy and paste it over into here, our key, and we screen it on. It's at 84%, so it'll come in at 100%, and you'll see the reflection is also lit, because it affects the reflection as well when things get bright. So the other thing you'll notice is that the lighting, or the key light, it wraps too far around these shapes for my liking. So what I like to do is I'll even correct my key light pass and only use it where I need to, in those key areas that I wanted separation. So in this area here, where I wanted this shape to stick out from the background, so we have a nice light against dark, this guy light against dark, create a light against dark here as well, contrast, bring back some brights in that, and some of these domes. Now we don't want to create too much contrast where it starts to get distracting in this area where I don't want it. So, you know, if you feel like it is, you know, you could always just knock it back down and you're good to go. If I put light here, we're going to have a thing where we have light against light, and maybe here we keep it a little bit more subtle than anywhere else. It's just catching it, but not quite. And over here is where we want it. We want to separate that light against dark. We want that boat to pick up some of that top key light there, to separate right there. We're looking for ways that we can create separation. We don't want this warmth in the water here. I want the water to feel cool, so we're not going to do that. And then if we find that it's a little too strong, we can always come back here and control the opacity. If we want to color correct, we can, and that's the beauty of having your separate passes. If we want to jack up the reds and yellows, really make it warm, we could. Not the look we're going for. We want to add a little bit of saturation and color to it, but not too much. So that's simply the key. Again, your lighting passes are there to serve you. Don't be a slave to the lighting pass and think that, you know, just because it came out of 3D, it's the end all be all. You can see how I use this strategically with design in mind to help me make those decisions that we made earlier on, to cut things out, bring things in front of others, and create separation, create that light against dark read. So while not using it too much to create too much form, you know. Alright, so moving on to some of the other things that we had. So now that we created some separation here, and I'll even go in and erase out some of the things that I've already hit up. So if I know that I've hit that already, I've created separation there, I've hit this guy up, those things will wait, and those things around. So let's go jump into maybe separating those two guys out. And the good thing is that I have it separated out on its own pass. So I'm going to copy this, or you can even right click duplicate into your PSD from the list there, drop it in, and once, I like to keep this on the top of my layer stack, and once it's in here, all I have to do is control click my red channel and I have my selection there. I can create a new layer, put that layer mask in there so it only affects that that mask there. And then to add some haze, I'll sample a value off the sky. It might be a little too bright, but let's take a look. And I'll just use a soft brush, and I'll lay it in thick first, and then I'll back off I'll look at it in context, black and white, to see how much separation I need. And that starts to feel good. So you can see the difference that makes right there, and how easy it was because of our IDs to hit that area without really making a fuss out of creating selections, matting things out. So there it is right there. That's all that was. That layer was right there. And we can go in and correct the color in this as well, which is great. You know, if you wanted to really shift things around, you could. But I generally tend to stick to a value off the sky, and sometimes it might be too desaturated. So a lot of times what beginners will do is they'll think this atmosphere is completely white, and they'll take white and they'll put it on and it'll look like a self-illuminated fog, where you should really pay attention to the actual saturation and how much saturation there is. Remember, it's getting lit by the same fill light that's in the painting here. So I've created my separation there. I can go back into my list and say, well, I've knocked that out now. That's good. Now we want to create some separation right here. And the way I do that, there it is right there, creating that separation. Now we get that edge to read nicely against the back there, knocking that contrast down in the back, but brightening it up so that we have a nice dark against light read. And you can do that several ways. You can, well, for one thing, we have our handy ID pass, which I believe I rendered an ID pass for that guy specifically, so that we don't have red against red. Let me see, let me take a look at, yeah, here we go. This is the one right here. Here it is. I'm going to duplicate that layer into our palette, our PSD here. Just put it at the top of the layer stack. Get rid of this other guy. And again, we can control select and let's create a group. Oops. Because we're going to combine. So we have that building, but we don't have the tree. And we can grab the tree from this guy right here. Copy paste it over. Green. Control select the green. And this time we're just gonna grab a brush and paint white in it, because we don't want it to affect anything else. Oops. Hide that. And we can adjust right there. So we want to paint behind it, so I'm going to invert that mask to say that we want we don't want any paint on that guy, but we want paint behind him. So I'm going to do it the quick, easy way right now, and then show you another way to do this. And by that's by grabbing a cloud brush, and I sample the value off this guy. Just going to lay this in and then go back and clean it up. So, you know, this shows you when you're sampling values off of the sky, it could get a little bright, but that's okay. We can fix that. And probably want to use an ID here as well. Oh, we had it. We can use the blue channel here. And fill this with, oh, we only want this section, so we can oops, we can grab our brush. We'll just do it with a simple brush. Click black and paint in the mask. We can take a look at it while we're painting. Might want to clean that up. I'm not sure why. I think a piece of the building is selected there. So we can just go clean that selection up like that. Preview that. And black that out. You can see the tree is a different value. We could have fixed that by, we don't have the mask, we deleted it, I believe. Oh, here it is. All that is in the green channel we have our values just a little bit too low, so I can copy that green channel and grab a adjustment curve and tell it that this is our widest point, so we'll just brighten that right up, and that'll fix it. But since we already have it, this is just for demonstration purposes. So grabbing that cloud brush, we can do a nice little atmosphere, and then we can also grab boats here. We have a pass for the boats. Let's grab that and bring it over. Just going to control hide it, and I don't want atmosphere on, oops, don't want atmosphere on these foreground boats. So I can go back and I'll delete it, and I can bring them, play that nice depth card again. You know, maybe that's too much. We want to keep it very subtle, and I may go in and turn down my opacity here just so I can keep it very subtle. Bring back a little bit more depth into those boats, and deselect it so my selection is not there anymore. And because there's fog underneath it, we want to clean that up too. So if it's not affecting that, it's not going to be underneath it. So there's that, keeping it subtle. We kind of lost it back here, so grab that same value, just kind of brighten it up back there. Go back and erase out if we need to. Alright, now that's a self-illuminated piece of fog there, which is wrong value, but I wanted the shape first because now I can correct it. Let's go to our levels here, bring it down, make sure it's in the right value range. That feels right there. Only being lit by that fill light. And of course, the color's off. We want to cool it down. So I'm going to add some cyan. Cyan and some blue, and make it fill into that into the right space there. Perfect. So now we have that nice separation. We've used our IDs, and we can also just pull it back slightly if we need to. We can go back and illuminate it if we need to a little bit, create extra separation. We can paint over those boats again if we need to. We have a ton of options for going back and doing it. And the other way to do it is by going into, whoops, and using smoke alphas, which I like to use. And you'll see I've created these alphas from clouds mostly, and they're pretty high res. That's why it's taken a little while to load. And what this does is it gives me real looking texture and breakup into that for free. Instead of using a cloud brush, I can use these alphas, bring it in, copy, paste. You'll see it's huge. So I can scale it down and then use that to paint it like that as my alpha. That's another great technique to use as well that I use all the time. So either one works. I'm going to delete these files because it keeps your PSD a lot lighter and easier to work with. Bringing those layers at 4K can really bog down your speed. Alright, now let's jump into street light. So the other thing that we had, well, let's just get rid of this now. We solved this problem. That's at 58%. We solved that problem. And now we have a lot of the lights that are going to help us create separation. So throwing in that light layer, building ID, let's go here. Here it is. So this is our light pass. You can see already how much separation it helps to create. The same things we were talking about, some beautiful reflection up in that water, and just illuminates the trees, which is good. This is what we want to create that separation. So we copy and paste this over, just like we have been with everything else. And that's how it comes in. We're screening it on, and in some areas it may be too much. So again, don't be afraid to change it around according to your design. If I don't want too much attention here, I'm not going to blast it with light like it was in the light pass. I find that that's too distracting, so I'm just going to paint that out. And I have to paint out that reflection too because there's no longer light there. So let's take a look at some reference here. I'm not sure where it is. Let's take a look at our reference here. Alright, so looking at light reflection, you notice the different colors as well. Color shifts depending on the type of light that it's reflecting. So a little warmer here, yellower, and then we get into some little bit of green yellow in here. So we really got to pay attention to some of that shift of color. We take a look, and that's exactly what this is doing. Is it's starting to shift the color of some of these lights differently to get that a little bit more of a realistic look. So, and then we'll have adjustments on depending on how much you want the light to impact it. I felt like it was too bright. We just need to knock it down, and maybe it was too saturated or not saturated enough to shift certain elements of this. You can see they're painted in the masks for the color corrections to what I need. So always changing your light passes. You're not going to keep it as is every single time. Sometimes you will. A lot of the times I'm changing things around to get exactly what I want out of it. Alright, and this is where you can paint your light as well. I decided to do some painting. I was too lazy to model these things, so I'm going to paint little poles here. Paint a light either from grabbing it from a reference such as this. You can, if it's high res enough, you can grab, let's say, this bunch here, for example, and paste it in here, screen it on, and then adjust some of that. Maybe grab a soft brush and just clean it up a little, you know, and add glows on top of this to give it the look it needs. And that's exactly what I did there, and painted a little glow with a soft brush to get that look. Sometimes you need to add a little bit, and that's exactly what I did, you know, just painting on top with the same things. And I think I did this, either I was too lazy to go distribute all these lights, or I didn't like the way it looked and I wanted to create my own. So even in here, creating some interest by putting some lights into the boats. You know, these are hand placed lights. Don't be afraid to use photographic elements in here as well. Grab from nice high-res photos like this. You can go in there and grab that, bring it in, and screen it if you wanted to. You know, depending on where you wanted it. And you can color correct this too. If you want it a little warmer, add some reds, some yellows, and increase saturation. You can get a nice warm light if you wanted to. And then, you know, maybe you want to get rid of these guys, but you want to keep these, and you can move them around. Create some nice visual interest with organizing these lights. Add a little bit of glow and you're good to go on those. Alright, so nothing too crazy with the lights. You could see just paying attention to a photo reference on how to color correct these and changing the color so it looks a little bit more natural, adding a little bit more street light here and there, and you're good to go. Alright, so let's jump into the trees and take a look at that. So, taking a look at the trees, they look kind of dull. There's no real form happening. Really flat, not much texture, and again, we used pretty crappy trees. But what we did get is information on how it interacts with the light, and we can mimic that for free. We get nice shadows from it, shadowing and occlusion, reflections. So we got some good things for it. And some of it doesn't look too bad, but it definitely needs work. A lot of these things are looking flat. So how do we fix these things? Well, let's take a look at reference. So taking a look at some reference, I like the canopy on these guys. I'll definitely use that. Different kinds of canopies. This is an Italian cypress tree. We'll be using this for texture. Not so much that. Again, kind of using something for texture here. So a lot of good stuff. So let's take a look at how we fix these things up. So I'm going to turn this on and you can see the difference. can see the form here bring back a little bit of that local color, that nice green, so it helps to kind of liven the scene up, whereas before it was kind of dead and flat. Not much color in there, but now it just feels alive. We got that local color, some form, and that's what we're looking for when we're doing this. So let's take a look how we did it. So the trees normally pretty crappy, they look like this. So how do we get it? How do we get this guy looking like something a little bit more realistic? So let's jump in to doing that. So first thing I'm going to do, I didn't like the fact that the trunk was sticking out like that. I wanted to go all the way down like a cypress tree does. It goes all the way down here. Taking a look at our reference again, you see the trunk is very low, and so we wouldn't see it with our shot. It'd be underneath here. So we need to fix that. First thing I'll do is I'll sample a color right off of the plate there, and I'll grab a little bit of a textured brush and sample it and come back in here and just paint in the sides, creating some breakup and creating a little bit of edge detail as well. So once I have that, I filled it in. That's just normal paint. What I need to do is fill it with some texture. So the way I do that is I'll go into my reference here. I'll take a look at something I can use. I don't want any lighting to be in it, and I think this guy serves pretty well. Let's jump into there, and because I have my edge detail already sorted out, I don't need to be careful about picking the right edges here. I just want to use this guy for its texture. Copy that, bring it over. And paste it in. Of course, the scale is off. You want to make sure the scale is right. Turn it. Once we're happy with the kind of placement, we'll go in there and sample a little bit all over the place, but I just want to make sure the scale is right. And I'll just drop it down to about 10%. It retains its local color. And I'm just going to grab a hard brush here. And just start sampling this all the way up. And we have our mask already set from our IDs, so I'm not worried about painting too much. And if I feel like the value is still off, I can go and correct it. I can darken it down a little bit. I can desaturate if it's too saturated, the local color, and fill it in with some texture. But now we need some form, and I want some form with some light coming over there. So here's a light pass on top of it, and the way I create that is usually I'll duplicate it, I'll screen it on. Let's do it at 100%. Actually, first let's screen it on, and then grab my curves here, and what I'm trying to do is create a high contrast matte. So we want to separate out those lights from the darks. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift it really warm. Might have to do this several times. And then I'll invert that, and with a soft brush I'll just go in and reveal that light in there to catch a little bit of that form. And if I feel like I need still more form, starting to flatten out, I want to create a little bit of that kind of cylindrical rendering, because that's what it is. It's pretty much a cylinder, and we want to create form there. I'll go back into that texture that I put in, and because underneath it we had that dark color, I'll just paint it out. So even at this level, I'm thinking about form. I'm thinking about the light side, and as it turns away from us into the darkness, we're going to start getting that darker value in there. And you can see the difference that that texture and that light made just brought that tree to life. And that's done the exact same way all the way across here along all the trees, and using different texture as well. I mean, using this guy or grabbing this guy in there, and you can find tons of photos. For the other guys, the bigger canopies, I'm going to use this, and I'm going to create a duplicate version of the blue channel, because it's the highest contrast, to help me pull a matte. And because it's relatively easy, I'm willing to go through these steps to get it clean. We just want the canopy. We're not concerned about anything else. Oops. Copy and paste. We see it's separated there. Now I'm just going to grab this guy here. And we'll go to this guy. We'll take that out because he's in the foreground. We can see it a little better. So I'm going to paste it, and because again we have this mask at the top of our group here, it's not going to go outside of that. Go back down. So we got to adjust our scale. Adjust our tilt, and we have something pretty close. And again, we're just going to drop it down. And the good thing about this reference is it is top lit as well. There's no harsh light. There's top light and the shadow at the bottom, which makes it perfect for our use. Feel it out, maybe a little too bright. You know, use your arrow keys, go down until you get a good feeling. Of where you want it to be, and that looks good to me. And if you want, you can go in there and just clean up that bottom part a little bit. But add some color, it adds some depth, and if you want, you can color correct this just a bit, so we get a little bit more top-down feel. And that's all there is to it. And as you know, that's the same actual reference used in this guy, scale down. This guy up here, scale down. Same, all the way across on all the trees. Using few photos, we can really brighten up our scene. See the difference there in the amount of life that it adds, and color and form and interest.